For decades, coffee has been one of the most misunderstood drinks in America. If you're over 60, there's a good chance you've heard the warning more times than you can count. Be careful with coffee. It's bad for your heart. It raises your blood pressure. You should probably drink less of it as you get older. The strange thing is that the more scientists studied coffee, the less certain they became that coffee was the real problem. In fact, one of the biggest discoveries in modern nutrition didn't come from finding a dangerous ingredient inside coffee. It came from realizing that millions of people may have been blaming the wrong thing all along. Think about your morning routine. Maybe the first thing you do is walk into the kitchen. Maybe you start the coffee maker before you even turn on the lights. Maybe that first cup feels less like a beverage and more like the moment your day officially begins. Now imagine someone telling you that this daily ritual you've enjoyed for years is secretly damaging your heart. Would you stop? Most people wouldn't, but they would feel guilty about it. And that's exactly what's happened to millions of older adults. For years, coffee carried a reputation that made people nervous. Yet while everyone was focused on the coffee itself, something far more important was happening inside the body. A process so quiet that most people never notice it. A process that doesn't cause pain, doesn't trigger symptoms, doesn't send warnings, but slowly changes the health of your arteries over time. To understand this, imagine your arteries as a network of highways. When you're young, those highways are smooth. Traffic moves efficiently. Everything flows exactly as it should. But as the years pass, things begin to change. The road surface becomes rougher. Repairs take longer. Small problems start appearing in places nobody can see. And here's what makes it dangerous. The damage often happens silently. You don't wake up one morning and suddenly feel your arteries aging. It happens gradually, one day at a time, 1 year at a time, which is why many people are shocked when they're told they have circulation problems, artery disease, or cardiovascular issues. The process started long before the diagnosis. Now here's where the story becomes fascinating. Inside, every artery is a thin, protective layer that acts almost like a security system. Its job is to keep blood flowing smoothly and protect the artery from damage. When that layer is healthy, everything works better. When it becomes irritated or inflamed, problems begin to develop. And according to a growing body of research, certain compounds found naturally in coffee may actually help support this protective system rather than damage it. That's the exact opposite of what many people expected. But before you start celebrating your morning cup, there's something you need to know. Because this is where the story takes a surprising turn. The difference between a coffee that may support your cardiovascular health and a coffee that works against it can come down to one small habit that happens only seconds after the coffee is poured. A habit so common that millions of Americans do it automatically, without thinking, without questioning it, without realizing it may completely change what happens inside the body after every sip. And once you understand what that habit is doing inside your arteries, you'll never look at your morning coffee the same way again. But first, we need to talk about the biggest coffee myth of all. The one that convinced an entire generation that coffee was raising their blood pressure and damaging their heart. Because what researchers eventually discovered about regular coffee drinkers surprised even many cardiologists. For years, coffee has been treated like the villain in the story of heart health, and to be fair, there was a reason for that. People would drink a cup of coffee and notice something immediately. Their heart seemed to beat a little faster. They felt more alert, more awake, more energized. Naturally, many assumed something dangerous was happening. If coffee could make you feel different within minutes, surely it had to be putting extra strain on the heart. But that's not the whole story. Imagine you've lived next to a railroad track your entire life. The first train that passes through might seem loud and overwhelming. You notice every vibration, every sound, every movement. But after months or years, something remarkable happens. Your brain adapts. You barely notice the train at all. Your body does something surprisingly similar with coffee. For someone who rarely drinks coffee, caffeine can create a temporary spike in alertness and even a short-term rise in blood pressure. That's real, but regular coffee drinkers are different. The body adapts, it learns, it adjusts. And over time, many of those early effects become far less significant than people imagine. That's one reason researchers began taking a closer look at long-term coffee drinkers instead of focusing only on what happens after a single cup. And what they found challenged decades of assumptions. Because when scientists followed large groups of habitual coffee drinkers over many years, they didn't consistently find the cardiovascular disaster many expected. In fact, they started seeing something much more interesting, a pattern. The people drinking moderate amounts of coffee often weren't doing worse. In many studies, they appeared to be doing better. Now here's where things get really fascinating. Coffee isn't just caffeine. Most people think caffeine is the entire story. It isn't. Coffee is more like a chemical library. Inside a single cup are hundreds of naturally occurring compounds interacting with your body in ways scientists are still trying to fully understand. Some of the most studied compounds belong to a group called polyphenols. But don't worry about remembering the name. What's important is what they do. Imagine your arteries as roads exposed to weather every day. Wind, rain, heat, traffic. Over time, that wear and tear begins to add up. Now imagine a maintenance crew constantly repairing small cracks before they become major damage. That's a simple way to think about the role antioxidants may play inside the body. They help defend tissues from the wear and tear that naturally accumulates over time. And after 60, that becomes especially important. Because aging doesn't just affect your joints, or your muscles, or your eyesight, it affects your arteries too, which means protecting them becomes increasingly valuable. But now we arrive at the part almost nobody talks about, the part that changes the entire conversation. Because while researchers were discovering these potentially beneficial compounds inside coffee, they were also uncovering something else, something capable of working against many of those benefits at the same time. Think about rowing a boat. One person rows forward, the other rows backward. Both are working hard, yet the boat barely moves. That's exactly what may happen when coffee's beneficial compounds meet one very common ingredient. An ingredient sitting on kitchen counters all across America. An ingredient so familiar that most people never question it. Sugar. And once you understand what sugar is doing inside aging arteries, you'll see why 2 cups of coffee can produce completely different outcomes depending on what gets added to them. Because the biggest threat may not be the coffee at all. It may be the spoon that follows. Sugar is one of the most familiar ingredients in America. It's in breakfast cereals. It's in salad dressings. It's in foods that don't even taste sweet. And for millions of people, it's been part of their morning coffee for so long that they hardly notice it's there. But here's the problem. Your arteries notice. Imagine taking a brand new rubber band and stretching it gently. It remains flexible, strong, resilient. Now imagine leaving that same rubber band in the sun for years. Slowly it becomes stiff, brittle, less capable of bending without damage. Something surprisingly similar can happen inside aging blood vessels. One of the reasons scientists became concerned about excess sugar is a process called glycation. The name isn't important. What matters is what it does. Think of glycation as a kind of biological rust. Over time, excess sugar can attach itself to proteins throughout the body, making tissues less flexible and more vulnerable to damage. And after 60, flexibility matters, because healthy arteries aren't supposed to be rigid. They're supposed to expand and contract with every heartbeat. They're supposed to adapt, to respond, to stay resilient. The stiffer they become, the harder the heart must work. Now think about the contradiction. Inside the coffee are compounds that may help support arterial health. Then sugar enters the cup and begins pushing in the opposite direction. It's like hiring a maintenance crew to repair a highway while another crew damages the road at the same time. Progress becomes slower, the benefits become harder to realize, and this may explain why 2 people can both say they drink coffee every day and experience very different outcomes over the years, because they're not really drinking the same coffee. One is drinking coffee, the other is drinking coffee, plus a daily dose of added sugar. And after decades, those choices add up. But the story doesn't stop with arteries, because one of the most surprising discoveries involves blood sugar itself. For years, researchers noticed a pattern appearing again and again. People who regularly drank coffee without sugar often seemed less likely to develop certain metabolic problems than expected. That doesn't mean coffee is medicine. It isn't. And it doesn't mean coffee can cancel out an unhealthy lifestyle. It can't. But it does suggest that coffee may be playing a more supportive role than many people realized. Which brings us to the practical question. What should someone over 60 actually do? The first answer is surprisingly simple. Don't panic about coffee. Most of the fear surrounding moderate coffee consumption is far more nuanced than people were once led to believe. The second answer is even more important. Pay attention to what you're putting into the coffee, because that's where the biggest difference often begins. If you've used sugar for decades, don't feel pressured to quit overnight. Your taste buds have spent years adapting. Give them time to adjust. Small changes tend to last longer than dramatic ones. The third answer is moderation. More isn't always better. Most of the research showing favorable outcomes tends to center around moderate consumption, not endless refills throughout the day. And timing matters too. A cup in the morning is very different from a large coffee late in the evening when your body is trying to prepare for sleep. But perhaps the most important lesson from this entire discussion is this. For years, millions of people focused on the wrong question. They asked, is coffee bad for me? The more interesting question may be, what am I adding to my coffee? Because once researchers looked beyond the coffee itself, the story changed dramatically. And that's why the next time you pour a cup, you shouldn't think about guilt. You shouldn't think about fear. You should think about understanding. Understanding what supports your arteries. Understanding what works against them. And understanding that sometimes the smallest daily habits create the biggest long-term consequences. The truth is, coffee was never the most important character in this story. The real story was about what happened after the coffee was poured. And for millions of adults over 60, that realization changes everything.